Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of my new show, Indiepressions, where we're going to be taking a Welcome to my new show, Indiepressions, where we're going to be taking a quick look at new indie games released on Steam. For our first episode, we're going to be taking a look at Butcher. Do I really want to start it like that? Hello, welcome to my new... Hello, and welcome to an idea of how many takes it gets me. Wow! Hello, and welcome to Indiepressions, my new show where I take a quick look and give a rough summary of my initial impression of a new indie game released on Steam. I don't have any kind of fancy intro sequence or really probably any music for this yet, so this video is going to be pretty rough. The game we're going to be talking about in our first episode is a game called Butcher, which just came out today. It's a throwback, pixel art, side-scrolling shooter. It's a genre I've always found interesting, but it's one that hasn't ever had that many mainstream games. Butcher is, in essence, a throwback to early 90s Apogee video games, like the original Duke Nukem's. Though, if anything, it plays a lot better than they did, on just like a basic control level, and not necessarily on a design level, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. It's a very successful early 90s throwback, one of the better ones I played, actually sort of getting the tone of the era without going over the top into irony. Like, it's played very straight, there's no real jokiness. The only overtly modern element is the subtitle, which is the easiest difficulty is hard, which is... when I see something like that, I pretty much always roll my eyes at that, because it's just, the kind of crowd that it's targeting, or it's like, ooh, like, this game's super fucking hard, you're gonna like that, right? You like not being able to fucking play games, right? Well, here's a game for you, dumbass. And it is hard, it's very hard. I can't beat the third level. You can see some footage right now of me playing it for, I don't know, how long did I play it? Let me just call up my footage here, and I can see how long did I play that one level for. Just the second video is 6 minutes of this same fucking level I'm playing. And I mean, I'm probably not the best at it. I made this video with less than half an hour of playtime on the game, but I feel like I've got a pretty good feeling at this point of the gist of what it's doing. So, one of the problems when you're doing a platformer shooter is always, or one of the issues is like the problem of the verticality of how do you deal with bullets going through platforms, or how does that affect it. And so, some side-scrolling platformer shooters go with sort of either a very horizontal design or a level that's divided up into horizontal tracks that you can sort of move between, but that you generally fight enemies on the same levels. But this is, I really like what it does here, where most of the platforms in a level are permeable to bullets, and part of learning to play Butcher is getting your head wrapped around that, like understanding that, oh yeah, I can shoot through that guy, I don't need to drop down to a different level, as long as I don't have a big solid chunk of platform in the way, I can hit him. But then you start to run into problems once you realize that you can hit enemies at a longer range than you'd think. So, at the point of the game I actually got to, I've only got 3 weapons unlocked out of, I think there's either 6 or 7 from seeing like a demo mock-up interface. So yeah, it's borderline irresponsible that I'm making this video this early into the game, I feel. But I don't think I can actually get any further, because, yeah, what I said, like the 6.5 minutes in the second clip, that's just of that. I didn't go through and tabulate how much time in my first clip is that level. But the problem is that the 3 weapons at that point in the game, in the early game, are the chainsaw, which is a melee weapon, which is useless. It is useless because enemies have guns that are as effective as yours, and they don't run out of ammo. So if you want to actually go in to chainsaw an enemy, you are just running into fire that you can't effectively dodge, because by the time they've shot at it, there's no way you can have a reaction time good enough, unless you're like juking back and forth on the way to get them. But then that's entirely dependent on luck, because again, most of the platforms in the game are permeable, and so there's no way you can position yourself to take cover, because there's just so many enemies. The game's a clusterfuck. So the central problem of the weapon balance, which really affects especially the level I'm at, is that the chainsaw is very ineffective. It's actively counterproductive against certain enemies. Like, a good number of enemies in the game fly around with jetpacks, and so one of the game's design priorities is setting up environmental traps and basically chains of events going on, and I think that's super cool. I think that's a super cool concept. So basically, when jetpack enemies die, they explode and they go down in a huge burst of flames, and it'll damage enemies along the way, which is really, really neat. Just the first problem with that is that the game's way too frantic to use that intelligently. It's just, if it goes down in the direction of some enemies that are there, it's just a lucky bonus for you. But the second problem is that, yeah, the chainsaw is completely ineffective against them, because you get hit by the explosion too then. So that's a problem, because the game really likes prolonged firefights where you can easily run out of ammo. And the ammo pickups don't stick around, they disappear after a couple seconds. So, as you can see in this footage I'm showing you, part of the problem is that I would just run out of ammo and then I'm fucked. And part of the problem is that the shotgun's the only weapon at this point in the game that's any good. The assault rifle is completely inaccurate. It has no accuracy at range whatsoever. The shotgun is a much more effective long-range weapon, because the shotgun's burst means that it hits a broader area than the assault rifle, giving it higher effective accuracy. And that's actually a fairly realistic depiction of a shotgun. Shotguns in real life aren't like video game shit, where it just goes boom out the front. So let's talk about what the game does well. It really nails the aesthetic of early 90s DOS games, especially Apogee games, in that it's got like a really messy, gungy, pixely look. But that also almost works to its detriment, where because the combat is so hectic, it is really quite hard to make out what's going on just at a glance. The game at points is borderline sickening to look at, and not because of the gore or the violence, just because the pixels are just such a mess. The characters don't stand out from the backgrounds very well. I mean, they sort of do, but there's enough shit going on in the background. There's animated backgrounds which look really pretty when you're just watching it. Like, this is a game that looks really good to watch, but to play, the visual design's really overwhelming, I found. The problem is that they had two design goals that sort of come into conflict. They wanted it to be an Apogee throwback that has this look of a pixely DOS action platformer game, and to make it really hectic, really frantic, difficult gameplay. And the problem is that the art style, the art direction, makes the game hard in sort of a cheap way, where it's just, some of the difficulty is coming from just ocular overstimulation. And that's cheap difficulty. That's not fun difficulty. You don't think, I could have handled that better. You think, oh, wow, I couldn't even tell what the fuck was happening there. Games that sell themselves on difficulty need to make sure that that difficulty is fair. Unless you're something like I Want to Be the Guy, where it's just a farce, but this is clearly not doing that. This isn't a comedy game where you die to bullshit and then you chuckle. This is a game where it's like, oh, this is super hard. If you can beat this, you're a real badass. And the thing about, obvious first comparison, you think Dark Souls. When you die in Dark Souls, you know it's like, oh, I really fucked that up. I did some stuff I shouldn't have, or I didn't anticipate well enough. I didn't observe what the enemies were doing. Whereas Butcher, again, most of the deaths are just to, I ran out of ammo and the chainsaw is an ineffective weapon. That is what most of my deaths came down to in that game, or just not realizing I was low on health, because, again, the enemy's guns are only a bit less effective than yours. And so you can lose a whole lot of health in a real hurry if you're fighting multiple enemies and they all get a good shot in on you. One thing I find interesting about this game is that it's a really, really blatant riff on the Terminator. It uses an alien angle rather than a time travel angle, but you're very clearly playing as the T-800. Excuse me. Which is, I find interesting because, looking back on video games of the early 90s I can't think of any games off the top of my head that riffed on the Terminator. I mean, you had a lot of stuff that was in the style of Aliens, obviously. Everything in the early 90s in terms of video games lifted something from Aliens, if it had anything to do with sci-fi or action. But nobody really stole anything from the Terminator, and I find that kind of weird, because I guess maybe the Terminator was just a bit too early. Like, it was too early in the 80s. I don't know when Terminator and Terminator 2 came out compared to Aliens, but I almost think Aliens probably came out first, before either of the Terminator movies. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But the fact is, I can't think of any other games, other than ones that might have had, like, an enemy type based on the T-800, or the cover art to the first Metal Gear game being a trace of, I think it was like Kyle Reese, I forget. Yeah, there's just not a whole lot of games that were about, putting you in the shoes of the Terminator in the way, or even of Kyle Reese, the way that there were games that put you in the shoes of, like, the Colonial Marines or of Ripley. And that's something I never even noticed until I played this game. This is like the first Terminator game that isn't, a shitty licensed tie-in game. I really want to like this game. The reason why I got it in the first place is it's $10, which I found a little pricey for being like a pixel art side-scrolling shooter, like that kind of thing. That $10 is a little bit much for me in terms of that, but I got it anyway because, I've thought of ideas like this before. I thought those Apogee side-scrolling shooters were pretty neat. Like, they never, and there's stuff like Broforce is around, but that's, you can only shoot to the side. What I really see in terms of the gameplay influence in Butcher is less Apogee and much more Vlambeer. Like, the last game I played that wanted to be a Vlambeer game this hard was Vintage Year. And where Vintage Year's sin was underdoing it, like, where Vintage Year was sort of like a blander Vlambeer, I feel like Butcher overdoes it. Like, it overjuices it to the point where it's visually overstimulating. Because Vlambeer's games have really good visual design. They don't have Butcher's problem where you can't even parse what you're looking at and then make a decision based on it. Vlambeer has a very strong sense of visual design. And yeah, when you play Butcher, it's definitely making a compromise in terms of playability for the sake of the look, but I don't think that's a good compromise. I feel like they either need to slow down the gameplay or make it less visually noisy. And there's an option in the game that you can turn off some of the visual effects, but that's no, that's not. I don't think. I mean, if you want to play this game because it appeals to you, I would probably recommend doing that. But I can't base my recommendation on intentionally hobbling the game to look worse than it's supposed to make it more playable. So, I think what it ultimately comes down to is that it's a little overpriced for what it is, especially because it's not particularly great. It has a really strong visual design, but that doesn't help it overcome some really serious gameplay failings. It really wants to be a fun, visceral, quick, hard shooting up. It wants to be a Vlambeer game. Okay, it wants to be a Vlambeer game, and that's hard. Okay, Vlambeer are really good at what they do, and this is, you know, a good stab at being like that, but not much of a better stab than something that you might see on like Newgrounds. Like that's sort of where I'm at with Butcher. Would be a really good Newgrounds game, but at $10, it's a little hard to justify. Like, if this sounds like an appealing mix to you, like if you hear, oh, like an Apogee throwback side-scrolling shooter, I want to play the shit out of that, then yeah, Butcher is probably what you want. But if you're just looking for a fun platform shooter, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, I can't off the top of my head think of anything that does it better, but it's not also a genre that I play a ton of, just that I've enjoyed in the past, but none of the indie offerings representing the genre have really, you know, grabbed me until Butcher, where I was like, yes, this looks like the kind of game that could be really good, really fun. And it really has the makings of a good game. I feel like there's nothing critically wrong with it. That it's just a few tweaks away from being really, really good. But as it is, it's got some issues where I couldn't give it a full, wholehearted recommendation unless an Apogee platformer shooter that is a throwback to the Terminator and has a lot of pixelated violence with a really strong art direction, really pretty pixel graphics. If you hear that and you think, hot damn, that's the game for me, then yeah, give it a shot. But if you're really on the fence at all, I don't think I can recommend Butcher. And I'm going to have to think of an outro. Shit.
Inhuman. Relentless. Unstoppable. You have only one purpose. Murder. Ultra-violent. Brutally hard. Rapid skill-based carnage. Use lethal weaponry. And deadly traps. To cleanse the earth of human vermin. Exterminate them all.